Hello, this is Jim W4JBM. Yesterday I talked a little bit about a Navy signal generator that I was tearing down, looking at, and trying to figure out what to do with. Had actually kind of come to a conclusion, but then some things changed, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. The next video segment you're going to see is actually from yesterday afternoon when I was finished up, pretty much ready to put things back together. And for now at least put that device up on the shelf. Then I'm going to follow that with some things that have happened since, as I was doing a little bit of research yesterday evening. So anyway, let's let it roll. So a fair question at this point is, what's next? The fact that I can't find a manual and that I don't have a power supply kind of limits the options. This is not it's not a straightforward restoration without having that piece of equipment and that piece of information. You got a couple of different options of what you could do. You could try to just wing it, basically try and figure out how to maybe apply some power and hope that you get it right. Another option that's a little safer would be to actually try and reverse engineer it. But reverse engineering can be its own issue, especially I've done a lot of work with vacuum tubes. Most of it, honestly, is with things like All-American 5, A5, broadcast band receivers. And I've repaired, since I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I've repaired, I would guess, 1,000 or so of those, either repaired or destroyed, taken apart, used for parts, but probably repaired more than I destroyed. But with something like this, it's tough to reverse engineer because, like the high voltage supply, is it 225 volts? Is it 250 volts? Is it 275 volts? Is it 300, 315? It could be a lot of, it could be 195 volts. There's just a lot of, there's no real standard. So you don't know. And, the values of the capacitors aren't going to necessarily tell you that. So reverse engineering it is kind of tough. Another option is just to button it up and set it aside for now. Sometimes that works. If I put this video out on YouTube, I may get a note 10 years from now from somebody that says, hey, I've got one of those too, and mine came with a manual. Would you like a copy? I've had that happen on some old test equipment that I've posted to email list out on the internet, and years and years later, somebody searching the archive comes across what I said. Sometimes it's been me saying I have a piece of equipment and a manual. That's kind of unusual, people asking me for a copy of the manual. Other times it's been somebody saying, hey, I've got the manual, I've just got this, picked it up from an estate sale, it's got the equipment and the manual, would you like a scan, would you like a copy of it? So setting it aside and waiting may have some value. The problem with that for me is I just don't have the room for that. So if I set everything aside for later, my basement's already full. I don't have the room for that. So another option would be to actually try and kind of a combination of reverse engineer and re-engineer it. So I know I've got a really nice variable capacitor in here. I know that I've got a really nice dial on the front of it. The turret switch in here is a little unwieldy, but I could come up with, I could probably replace all this with some kind of transistor oscillator without too much trouble, and have something. But how useful would it be? I've already got several signal generators. I've got a digitally synthesized arbitrary function generator that goes up to 25 megahertz. I've got the HP that goes up to the HP 608D, goes up to 420. I've got a Tektronix, the TM5 or SG503. It's a TM500 series plug-in. The SG503 goes up to, I believe, 200 and something megahertz. I've also got function generators that go up to like 2, 3, 4, 5 megahertz. And then I've got a couple other test oscillators around too, so I really don't need it. That could be the basis for something like a potentially interesting receiver project. Actually, one of the things that you see it's not that uncommon, is to use something like this as the basis for a regen. You've got a really nice, again, capacitor with a really nice dial on it. You can figure out what the inductances need to be, and you can make maybe even a nice little one tube regen, or maybe have multiple tubes in here. And that's something, if it was a little more compact, that would be a little more attractive. The fact that really the frequency part of this is just this upper half, this whole bottom half, doesn't add a whole lot for a regen. It actually just gets in the way. Makes the thing, I don't know if you noticed on the nameplate, it says it weighs 55 pounds. It makes it a pretty heavy beast. So another alternative is to use it for parts. That's never something I really take trivial, especially on a piece of gear that's, this is in reasonably good shape. It's probably restorable if I had a manual. I would have to build an external power supply. I hate to just part things out. This is, it's a nice capacitor, but I can go buy a nice capacitor for $15, $20. And actually I've got a box full of nice capacitors, so I don't really need the nice capacitor. I don't need the trimmers or anything like that necessarily. But at the same time, parts may be the way things go. I don't know. I'll have to give it a little bit of thought. Probably for now, I'll set it aside. I probably would not part it out until I actually started needing some of the parts. Like I said, I got a lot of variable capacitors. I got a lot of trimmers. There's nothing else in here that seems to be of... Actually, the thing I guess that fascinates me the most is the tube sockets. The fact that they are freestanding sockets that have the screw terminals on them. That would be handy for making something like a single tube transmitter, or maybe a simple regen or something like that. That type of socket is not that, it's not unusual, but it's not something you run across a lot either. We run across it these days. It's actually relay sockets. A lot like an 8-pin relay socket can be used for an octal base tube. So for now, I probably will just set it to the side. At some point in the future, I may decide that there's parts in here that I need, and I'll start to part it out. Typically, when I part something out, I'll just spend like a day or half a day going through and taking all the parts I think are valuable out of it, so I can get rid of the carcass itself. Because otherwise, these take huge amounts of room. And in the meantime, maybe, like I said, maybe somebody watches this video and says, hey, I've got a manual for that, and lets me know, and I wind up with a manual, and I try to restore it. So those are the kind of things, as you mess with radios. Different people have different philosophies. There's some people that would never part anything out like this. To them, it has almost historic value, and they would want to restore it in a way that is as authentic as possible. For others, they wouldn't hesitate at all to part it out, and with the kind of the philosophy that it's better to use the parts for something and make something out of them that you actually use, instead of just having them sit there unused. I can go either way on things that are nice and kind of do have some either historic or sentimental value. I tend to hesitate to part them out. I'd rather fix them. For things that there's a lot of, and this is serial number 63, the fact that I can't find a manual makes me think that there probably weren't thousands of these built. There's probably maybe a few hundred that were built, and maybe less than 100 that are still sitting around. So, my dad served in the Navy, so Navy gear always kind of has a sentimental value to me. I also like this was made by General Radio. I've got some other General Radio equipment. I like stuff that's made by General Radio. Don't have like a huge collection like I do with the Tektronix stuff, but General Radio was an interesting company. They did a lot of really cool stuff. So the fact that this was built by them means something. So I don't know. Like I said, for now I'll probably button it up and just wait. And at some point, somebody will be cleaning out my basement 20, 30 years from now, and it'll be their choice what to do with it, or maybe sometime between now and then I'll either really need some of the parts, or I'll find a manual. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, I think it's kind of like these things. One thing I do like to do, even if I am going to part it out, I think it's kind of interesting to have the guided tour, so that if somebody at some point wants to know a little bit about what these actually looked like on the inside, They can tell. Maybe they see it on eBay and are trying to decide if they can buy it or want to buy it, and how hard it would be to fix. And this can give you an idea of what's inside and what you're getting yourself into. And this actually, it looks very well constructed. It doesn't look like it would be that hard to repair. There are a lot of the kind of the bathtub metal enclosed capacitors that probably all of those would need to be replaced, and there's a fair number of those. But other than that, there's nothing that's particularly scary in here. There's no electrolytic capacitors because those would all be in the power supply unit. Now, if you have the power supply unit, I have no idea what that looks like. The coils look like they're very robustly made. It looks like a good unit. It's kind of a shame it's not working. Don't have a power supply, don't have a manual. But anyway, it is what it is. And like I said, I thought I'd share it. Maybe somebody will find it interesting. Maybe nobody will. I always appreciate likes and subscribes if you do find it interesting. And I've got lots more projects coming up. I'll be putting more videos out on. Thank you. Okay, so basically where I was at with that particular device was it seemed like I had an orphan that I wasn't going to be able to find any documentation about. It really isn't something I necessarily needed on the bench. Didn't know anything about the power supply. Didn't have a power supply, so it was pretty much something I was going to set to the side. I was last night as I was getting ready to go to bed, I was on the tablet and surfing the internet a little bit and looked at for documentation on it. Still couldn't find anything, but I decided, what about the power supply part number? Because the power supply part number was different than the number for the oscillator itself. And I looked that up, and it happened to link to a page where they were talking about the oscillator, the Navy version of the oscillator, and they mentioned that it was the same, basically, as the General Radio 605B. And it mentioned that the 605B had the power supply with it. They were both enclosed in a wooden box that was used as the cabinet. And that was kind of interesting. I did a Google search, was able to find a manual for the 605A, and it looked pretty much like the Navy oscillator that I'd been working on. And it had information about, it had a schematic, it had information about the tubes, the voltages that were required, a schematic for the power supply, schematic for the device. So all the information I would need to get the thing working again. So at that point I was thinking, okay, that's, maybe it doesn't just set to the side. Maybe over the next couple weeks I try and find some time to actually work on it. So after that I got to thinking, so to kind of set the context, a lot of the stuff that I've been working on the last couple of weeks came from the estate of a Silent Key. He had been inactive because of health reasons for about a decade, and most of this had set in his garage/shop that was outside. And he passed away, I believe, about a year ago, and the family was going through and trying to clean things up. And they wanted somebody to have the radio stuff that would appreciate the radio stuff in effect. So when my wife and I both we went over to unload things, and it was funny because my wife, we've got a pickup truck, a dual cab pickup truck, and I went out, and I've also got an 18-foot flatbed trailer, and I was ready to hook that up, and she's like, "What are you doing?" It's like, if this is as much stuff as it sounds like, we're going to need the trailer. So I really wasn't expecting it to go quite like it did, but we filled the 18-foot trailer, we filled the bed of the pickup truck, we filled the back part of the cab, and there were a couple of treasures that were riding up in front with me when we left. So it was a lot of stuff. And when you're doing something like that, you want to be sensitive to the family also. I mean, these are things that meant something to somebody, that meant a lot to them, and you don't want to be saying, "No, that's not worth me." You taking that, you just throw that away. That's just not. It's not what people want to hear. It's not polite. And a lot of times, the people that I've kind of seen come across that way, a lot of times they're ignorant. They're just going, trying to find the real treasures, the high dollar stuff, the things that are worth maybe a couple $100 and don't require any work. They don't really care about the stuff for the sake of the stuff. There's a balance there, but I was sensitive to that. We basically loaded everything up. But as I was sitting there last night and thinking about that, the 605 General Radio 605B was in a wooden case. I remembered something that was in kind of rough shape that was in a wooden case that had been on the trailer, and I'd stuck in the back of the basement because, like I said, it was in rough shape. It's something that I really considered at that point to be primarily for parts. And I got to wondering, could that have been a 605? And this morning when I looked, it was. So this is it sitting here. There's an empty bay here where this is where, for the standard model of the 605B, the power supply would have been here. There are, like I said, there's a trailer full of stuff that I had to fit into the basement, which was no easy chore. The power supply may well be around someplace. I don't remember seeing anything like that, but it may be. But whether it is or not, I know what I need in terms of a power supply now. This one is in much rougher shape. The dial is missing, and actually I kind of wonder if the dial here was used to salvage and put something on the other one, because on the Navy version, the General Radio logo was in the center of the dial, and I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with stuff of this particular vintage for the military, but a lot of times in the military stuff, there's not the logos of the individual companies, because a lot of times these things that were built for military service were made by a variety of contractors. So they tend to be much more generic, and usually there was a little nameplate someplace that told you who made it. And they would use parts like whoever was making them for the Navy, whether it was General Radio or others, would probably have used some General Radio parts. But for the logo itself to wind up on it, in my experience, that's a little bit rare. So again, I wonder if somebody took the dial off of this to repair the other one. Also, the control for the carrier adjustment is missing. So there's this one's, and there's a couple other little differences too. Like on the other one, modulation percent only goes up to 50%, and for the model for, or the manual for the 605A, it talks about keeping it at 50%. Above that can give you distortion. This modulation meter actually goes up to 80%, and it looks like there's little buttons there for 90 and 100% would be, but probably 80% is the recommended modulation, maximum modulation. Other than that, it's pretty much the same layout, same configuration as the other one. So now I'm a little more inspired to try and get the other one working. I probably will take that on. I don't know that I'm going to do that right away. It's something I may wait a couple of weeks or months to do. I've got quite a bit of this stuff to go through, trying to figure out what is good, what's bad, what's repairable, what's not repairable. But now I am thinking pretty seriously about repairing that. I may even put it in this cabinet instead of the Navy cabinet. The power supply is kind of a question mark. It actually, I believe if I remember right, it's 200 volts at 35 milliamps, and then also a supply for the filament. This, I don't know how the power supply actually connected over. I don't feel, there's not a plug there. On the other one, there's a plug down here where the power supply plugged in. But I could feed all that from the back, and basically put some kind of blank cover on this, put the transformer and everything in here, and build a replacement power supply without too much trouble. I mean, a 200 volt transformer and a decent filament transformer, and I'm in business basically. And I could actually make it a regulated power supply, which would increase the stability and stuff of the device. So anyway, I wanted to give a quick update on where things stand now. It is a change from where I kind of felt like things stand yesterday. Some other things I've noticed here: the outputs, the connectors are rusted. It looks like there have been mice inside. There's a lot of cobwebs and stuff on the inside of this cabinet, and it has been open over here. So. That's a possibility. The inside of this cabinet is lined with copper, so it would be fairly RF proof. But You can see a vent hole there in the back. So putting in something like a small fan, ventilation fan would be potential also. Although normally you probably want some kind of filter or some kind of fan or vent on the front, so you're actually pulling air through. You don't want to put a fan in. Like if you put a fan that's sucking air out back there and seal this up, that means it's going to suck air in around all these controls into the connectors and stuff like that. If you have it pushing air out or into the container, then air is going to be coming out from around all those, which is that's not that good. So really, ideally, you get some kind of flow across across things like the tubes when you have openings. So I'm really not sure what I'm going to do there. And like I said, I may find the power supply itself. I don't know. But if I don't, I mean, there's and some of this stuff. There's a bunch of transformers that would meet the need. I've also been thinking pretty seriously about building a regulated supply for just kind of use on tube projects in general. I've got a good Hewlett-Packard transformer that came out of an old oscilloscope that had been gutted, and it's got all kinds of secondaries on it for some pretty hefty outputs to filaments and something like a 300 volt supply, also a higher voltage supply like a 6 or 800 volt like you might find in a transceiver. So I may just build a more generic power supply and just put something like some kind of connector here to feed that into this and use the more generic supply. I'm not sure on that yet. So got some thinking to do, but did want to give a quick update. Actually, this it gets back to another thing, and I'll do kind of a shameless self-plug here. I've got a book about radio documentation and keeping and your own record keeping and tracking your projects and stuff like that. And actually, this part of that. So part of it goes back to when you build a project, and 10 years later it breaks. Not having to go back and try and find the magazine that you pulled that out of, or the old issue of the ARRL handbook, or wherever you pulled it from. Make copies, keep a file, keep a notebook with those kind of things in it, so that it's all in one place. So another experience I had several years ago was a local silent key who had a huge hoard of things and was well respected in the area, well known in the area. When he passed away, some of the people that were helping, what they found were the small, I don't know if you've seen the round stickers that you can find for like putting prices on things and stuff. Anyway, these round stickers were on just about every piece of gear the guy owned, and they had a number on them, and that number cross-referenced to a file folder in a file cabinet, and those file folders showed information like if he had a copy of the manual, it was in that file folder. If there was a receipt from when he bought it, it was in that file folder. There were also notes, like if he bought it at a Hamfest, there were notes about when he had bought it, how much he paid for it. Something like this, where he had two pieces of equipment that were the same, that he was kind of thinking about gutting one to get the other one working. Those kind of things would have been documented, that hey, there's two pieces of equipment that have the same number on it, and those two really go together, and I'm trying to get one of them working, and I'm using parts off of the other one to make it work. That kind of stuff, it makes life easier, for one thing, just for us as hobbyists. But the other thing is that as they were selling off the various equipment that he had, it brought significantly more at the Hamfest where it was being sold than it would have without that, because now if they had a piece of old radio gear, they could hand you the folder and you could see, okay, it's got a manual. The last time it was powered up was in 1980 or it was in 1990. It's been recapped. It hasn't been recapped. The guy has been inside it, and the battery compartment's messed up because batteries leaked, or it's got some kind of specific problem that he wasn't able to isolate and troubleshoot yet. All that information was there, and I would say that I don't know exactly how much they wound up getting, but I would have to think, from my experience, having seen a couple of estates get sold off, that it probably was the difference between maybe $1,000, $2,000 for everything, and a lot of it just being bought for pennies on the dollar because they didn't know the state of it or anything like that. Didn't have a manual. Instead of that, it probably was more like $5,000 to $10,000 they brought, with a lot of not particularly high dollar radio equipment. A lot of it was older vintage stuff. It wasn't, it was military surplus. It was lower end receiver. It wasn't like a high end transceiver, or it wasn't like some of the classic radios that are out there that really command a premium. It was a good collection, but it was a modest collection. But the fact that there was the documentation and the information, probably I would guess it at least made a difference of bringing in 3, 4, maybe 5 times as much in terms of what they were able to sell things for compared to what they would have been able to sell it for without the documentation. So something to think of. I teased my daughter when we brought all this in that, a couple decades from now, I feel sorry for the poor sap that's going to have to come into my basement, take all this stuff out and load it on his flatbed trailer, and then try and figure it out, what works, what doesn't work, and stuff like that. I've tried to get better about keeping records. I'm pretty good about it on projects I build. I haven't been as good about it on some of the restoration efforts. Actually, that's one of the things, like the YouTube videos can serve kind of a dual purpose there, because there is a little bit of history about the Navy piece of test equipment and how they relate and fit together. So anyway, I wanted to share that update. It probably will be a while before I actually get around to doing a formal restoration on the oscillator and getting it up and running. So don't look for that anytime in the next couple of weeks, but hopefully sometime, maybe over Christmas holidays or something like that, I'll have half a day or a day to give it and see where things go. I appreciate you watching. Always appreciate likes, subscribes, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.